Well, greetings, dear listeners, wherever you may be in time and space. Let us have more of Jurgen, a comedy of justice by James Branch Cabell, first published in 1919. Chapter 31, The Fall of Pseudophilus. So Jurgen abode in Luque and complied with the customs of that country. And what with one thing and another, he and Calorus made the time pass pleasantly enough until the winter solstice was at hand. Now Pseudophilus, as has been said, was at war with Philistia. So it befell that at this season Luque was invaded by an army of Philistines, led by their queen Dolores, a woman who was wise but not entirely reliable. They came from the coast, a terrible army, insanely clad in such garments as had been commanded by Aegeus, a god of theirs, and chanting psalms in honor of their god Veltino, who had inspired this crusade. Thus they swept down upon Pseudophilus and encamped before the city. These Philistines fought in this campaign by casting before them a more horrible form of Greek fire, which consumed whatever was not gray-colored. For that color alone was now favored by their god Veltino, and all other colors, his oracle had decreed, are forevermore abominable until I say otherwise. So the forces of Philistia were marshaled in the plain before Pseudophilus, and Queen Dolores spoke to her troops. And smilingly she said, "Whenever you come to blows with the enemy, he will be beaten. No mercy will be shown, no prisoners taken. As the Philistines under Libnah and Goliath and Goliath and Gershon and many other tall captains made for themselves a name which is still mighty in traditions and legend, even thus today may the name of realist be so fixed to Pseudophilus by your deeds today, that no one shall ever dare again even to look askance at a Philistine. Open the door for realism once and all for all." Meanwhile, within the city, Achilles, king of men, addressed his army. "The eyes of all the world will be upon you, because you are in some especial sense the soldiers of romance. Let it be your pride, therefore, to show all men everywhere not only what good soldiers you are, but also what good men you are, keeping yourselves fit and straight in everything, and pure and clean through and through. Let us set ourselves a standard so high that it will be a glory to live up to it. And then let us live up to it, and add a new laurel to the crown of Pseudophilus. May the gods of old keep you and guide you." Then said Thersites in his beard, "Certainly Pelides has learned from history with what weapon a strong man discomforts the Philistines." But the other kings applauded, and the trumpet was sounded, and the battle was joined. And that day the forces of Philistia were everywhere triumphant. But they report a queer thing happened, and it was that when the Philistines shouted in their triumph, Achilles and all they who served him rose from the ground like gleaming clouds and passed above the heads of the Philistines, deriding them. Thus was Pseudophilus left empty, so that the Philistines entered thereunto without any opposition. They defiled the city of blasphemous colors, then burned it as a sacrifice to their god Veltino, because the color of ashes is gray. Then the Philistines erected lithoi, which were not unlike maypoles, and began to celebrate their religious rites. So it was reported, but Jurgen witnessed none of these events. Let them fight it out, said Jurgen. It is not my affair. I agree with Silenus. Dullness will conquer dullness, and it will not matter. But do you women, dear, take shelter with your kindred in the unconquerable woods, for there is no telling what damage the Philistines may do hereabouts. Will you go with me, Jurgen? My dear, you know very well that it is impossible for me ever again to go into the woods after the trick I played upon Phobator. And if only you had kept your head about that beanpole of a Helen in her yellow wig, for I have not a doubt that every strand of it is false, and at all events this is not a time to be arguing about it, Jurgen. Why, then you would never have meddled with Uncle Phobator. It simply shows you. Yes, said Jurgen. Still, I do not know. If you come with me into the woods, Uncle Phobator, in his impetuous way, will quite certainly turn you into a boar pig, because he has always done that to the people who irritated him. I seem to recognize that reason. But give me time, and I can get around Uncle Phobator, just as I have always done, and he will turn you back. No, says Jurgen obstinately. I do not wish to be turned into a boar pig. Now, Jurgen, let us be sensible about this. Of course, it is a little humiliating, but I will take the very best of care of you and feed you with my own acorns, and it will be a purely temporary arrangement. And to be a pig for a week or two, or even for a month, isn't infinitely better for a poet than being captured by the Philistines. How do I know that, says Jurgen. For it is not, after all, as if Uncle Phobator's heart were not in the right place. It is just his way, and besides, you must remember what you did with that gimlet. Said Jurgen, all this is hardly to the purpose. You forget, I have seen the hapless swine of Phobator, and I know how he ameliorates the natural ferocity of his boar pigs. No, I am Jurgen, so I remain. I will face the Philistines, and whatever they may possibly do to me, rather than suffer that which Phobator will quite certainly do to me. Then I stay too, said Calorus. No, woman dear. But do you not understand, says Calorus, a little pale as he saw now, since the life of a hamadryad is linked with the life of her tree, nobody can harm me so long as my tree lives, and if they cut down my tree I will die, whatever I may happen to be. I had forgotten that. He was really troubled now. And you can see for yourself, Jurgen, it is quite out of the question for me to be carrying that great oak anywhere, and I wonder at your talking such nonsense. Indeed, my dear, says Jurgen, we are very neatly trapped. While nobody can live longer in peace than his neighbor chooses, nevertheless, it is not fair. As he spoke, the Philistines came forth from the burning city. Again the trumpet sounded, and the Philistines advanced in their order of battle. Chapter 32. sundry devices of the Philistines. Meanwhile, the people of the field had watched Pseudophilus burn and had wondered what would befall them. They had not long to wonder, for next day the fields were occupied without any resistance by the inhabitants. The people of the field, said they, have never fought, and for them to begin now would be a very unheard of thing indeed. So the fields were captured by the Philistines, and Calorus and Jurgen and all the people of the field were judged summarily. They were declared to be obsolete illusions, whose merited doom was to be relegated to limbo. To Jurgen this appeared unreasonable. For I am no illusion, he asserted. I am manifestly flesh and blood, and in addition, I am the High King of Eubonia, and no less. Why, in disputing these facts, you contest circumstances that are so well known hereabouts as to rank among mathematical certainties. And that makes you look foolish, as I tell you, for your own good. This vexed the leaders of the Philistines, as it always vexes people to be told anything for their own good. We would have you know, said they, that we are not mathematicians, and that moreover we have no kings in Philistia, where all must do what seems to be expected of them, and have no other law. How then can you be the leaders of Philistia? Why, it is expected that women and priests should behave unaccountably. Therefore, all we who are women or priests do what we will in Philistia, and the men there obey us. And it is we, the priests of Philistia, who do not think you can possibly have any flesh and blood under a shirt which we recognize to be a conventional figure of speech. It does not stand to reason, and certainly you could not ever prove such a thing by mathematics, and to say so is nonsense. But I can prove it by mathematics quite irrefutably. I can prove anything you require of me by whatever means you may prefer, said Jurgen modestly, for the simple reason that I am a monstrous clever fellow. Then spoke the wise Queen Dolores, saying, I have studied mathematics. I will question this young man in my tent tonight, and in the morning I will report the truth as to his claims. Are you content to endure this interrogation, my spruce young fellow, who wear the shirt of a king? Jurgen looked full upon her. She was lovely as a hawk is lovely, and of all that Jurgen saw, Jurgen approved. He assumed the rest to be in keeping, and deduced that Dolores was a fine woman. Madam and Queen, said Jurgen, I am content, and I can promise to deal fairly with you. So that evening Jurgen was conducted into the purple tent of Queen Dolores of Philistia. It was quite dark there, and Jurgen went in alone, and wondering what would happen next. But this scented darkness he found of excellent augury, if only because it prevented his shadow from following him. Now you who claim to be flesh and blood and king of Eubonia too, says the voice of Queen Dolores, what is this nonsense you were talking about proving any such claims by mathematics? Well, but my mathematics, replied Jurgen, are Praxagorian. What do you mean, Praxagorius of Kos? As if, scoffed Jurgen, anybody had ever heard of any other Praxagoras. But he, as I recall, belonged to the medical school of the Dogmatici, observed the wise Queen Dolores, and was particularly celebrated for his researches in anatomy. Was he then also a mathematician? The two are not incongruous, madam, as I would be delighted to demonstrate. Oh, nobody said that, for indeed it does seem to me I have heard of this Praxagorian system of mathematics, though I confess I have never studied it. Our school, madam, postulates, first of all, that since the science of mathematics is an abstract science, it is best inculcated by some concrete example. Said the Queen, but that sounds rather complicated. It occasionally leads to complications, Jurgen admitted, through a choice of the wrong example, but the axiom is no less true. Come then and sit next to me on this couch, if you can find it in the dark, and do you explain to me what you mean? Why, madam, by a concrete example I mean one that is perceptible to any of the senses, as to sight, or hearing, or touch. Oh, said the Queen. Now I perceive what you mean by a concrete example, and grasping this, I can understand that complications must of course arise from a choice of the wrong example. Oh, well then, madam, it is first necessary to implant in you, by the force of example, a lively sense of the peculiar character and virtues and properties of each of the numbers upon which is based the whole science of Praxagorian mathematics. For in order to convince you thoroughly, we must start far down, at the beginning of all things. I see, said the Queen, or rather, in this darkness I cannot see at all, but I perceive your point. Your opening interests me, and you may go on. Now one, or the monad, says Jurgen, is the principle and the end of all. It reveals the sublime knot which binds together the chain of causes. It is the symbol of identity and equality, of existence, of conservation, and of general harmony. And Jurgen emphasized these characteristics vigorously. In brief, one is a symbol of the union of things. It introduces that generating virtue, which is the cause of all combinations, and consequently one is a good principle. Ah, said Queen Dolores, I hardly admire a good principle, but what has become of your concrete example? It is ready for you, madam. There is but one Jurgen. Oh, I assure you, I am not yet convinced of that. Still, the audacity of your example will help me to remember one, whether or not you prove to be really unique. Now two, or the dyad, the origin of contrasts. Jurgen went on penetratingly to demonstrate that two was a symbol of diversity and of restlessness and of disorder, ending in collapse and separation, and was accordingly an evil principle. Thus was the life of every man made wretched by the struggle between his two components, his soul and his body. And thus was the rapture of expectant parents considerably abated by the advent of twins. 3, or the triad, however, since everything was composed of 3 substances, contained the most sublime mysteries, which Jurgen duly communicated. We must remember, he pointed out, that Zeus carried a triple thunderbolt, and Poseidon a trident, whereas Hades was guarded by a dog with 3 heads. This in addition to the omnipotent brothers themselves being a trio. Thus Jurgen continued to impart the Praxagorian significance of each digit separately, and by the queen was declaring his flow of wisdom was superhuman. Ah, but madam, not even the wisdom of a king is without limit. 8, I repeat then, is appropriately the number of the Beatitudes, and 9, or the Ennead, also being the multiple of 3, should be regarded as sacred. The queen attended docilely to his demonstration of the peculiar properties of 9, and when he had ended, she confessed that beyond doubt 9 should be regarded as miraculous. But she repudiated his analogues as to the Muses, the lives of a cat, and how many tailors made a man. Rather, I shall remember always, she declared, that King Jurgen of Eubonia is a 9 days' wonder. Well, madam, said Jurgen with a sigh, now that we have reached 9, I regret to say we have exhausted the digits. Oh, what a pity, cried Queen Dolores. Nevertheless, I will concede the only illustration I disputed. There is but one Jurgen, and certainly this Praxagorian system of mathematics is a fascinating study. And promptly she commenced to plan Jurgen's return with her into Philistia so that she might perfect herself in the higher branches of mathematics. For you must teach me calculus and geometry and all other sciences in which these digits are employed. We can arrange some compromise with the priests. That is always possible with the priests of Philistia, and indeed the priests of Sesphera can be made to help anybody in anything. And as for your hamadryad, I will attend to her myself. But no, says Jurgen, I am ready enough in all conscience to compromise elsewhere. But to compound with the forces of Philistia is the one thing I cannot do. Do you mean that, King Jurgen? The queen was astounded. I mean it, my dear, as I mean nothing else. You are in many ways an admirable people, and you are in all ways a formidable people. So I admire, I dread, I avoid, and at the very last pinch I defy. For you are not my people, and willy-nilly my gorge rises against your laws as equally insane and abhorrent. Mind you, though, I assert nothing. You may be right in attributing wisdom to these laws, and certainly I cannot go so far as to say you are wrong, but still, at the same time, that is the way I feel about it. So I who compromise with everything else can make no compromise with Philistia. No, my adored Dolores, it is not a virtue, rather it is an instinct with me, and I have no choice. Even Dolores, who was queen of all the Philistines, could perceive that this man spoke truthfully. I am sorry, says she, with real regret, for you could be much run after in Philistia. Yes, said Jurgen, as an instructor in mathematics. But no, King Jurgen, not only in mathematics, said Dolores reasonably. There is poetry, for instance, for they tell me you are a poet, and a great many of my people take poetry quite seriously, I believe. Of course, I do not have much time for reading myself, so you can be the poet laureate of Philistia on any salary you like. And you can teach us all your ideas by writing beautiful poems about them, and you and I can be very happy together. Teach, teach. There speaks Philistia, and very temptingly too, through an adorable mouth that would bribe me with praise and fine food and soft days forever. It is a thing that happens rather often, though. and I can but repeat that art is not a branch of pedagogy. Really, I am heartily sorry, for apart from mathematics, I like you, King Jurgen, just as a person. I too am sorry, Dolores, for I confess to a weakness for the women of Philistia. Certainly you have given me no cause to suspect you of any weakness in that quarter, observed Dolores. In the long while you have been alone with me, and have talked so wisely, and have reasoned so deeply, I am afraid that after tonight I shall find all other men more or less superficial. Hi-ho! And I shall probably weep my eyes out tomorrow when you are relegated to limbo, for that is what the priests will do with you, King Jurgen, on one plea or another, if you do not conform to the laws of Philistia. And that one compromise I cannot make. Ah, but even now I have a plan wherewith to escape your priests. And failing that, I possess a cantrap to fall back upon, and in my hour of direst need. My private affairs are thus not yet in a hopeless or even in a dejected condition. This fact now urges me to observe that 10, or the decade, is the measure of all, since it contains all the numeric relations and harmonies. So they continued their study of mathematics until it was time for Jurgen to appear again before his judges. And in the morning Queen Dolores sent word to her priests that she was too sleepy to attend their council, but that the man was indisputably flesh and blood, amply deserved to be a king, and as a mathematician had not his peer. Now a court was held by the Philistines to decide whether or not King Jurgen should be relegated to limbo. And when the judges were prepared for judging, there came into the court a great tumblebug, rolling in front of him his loved and properly honored young ones. With the creature came pages in black and white, bearing a sword, a staff, and a lance. This insect looked at Jurgen, and its pincers rose, erect in horror. The bug cried to the three judges, "Now, by St. Anthony, this Jurgen must forthwith be relegated to limbo, for he is offensive and lewd and lascivious and indecent." "And how can that be?" says Jurgen. "You are offensive," the bug replied, "because this page has a sword which I choose to say is not a sword. You are lewd, because that page has a lance, which I prefer to think is not a lance. You are lascivious, because yonder page has a staff, which I elect to declare is not a staff. And finally, you are indecent for reasons of which a description would be objectionable to me, and which therefore I must decline to reveal to anybody." "Well, that sounds logical," says Jurgen, "but still at the same time it would be no worse for an admixture of common sense, for you gentlemen can see for yourselves, by considering these pages fairly and as a whole, that these pages bear a sword and a lance and a staff, and nothing else whatever, and that all the lewdness is in the insectival mind of him who itches to be calling these things by other names." The judges said nothing as yet, but they that guarded Jurgen and all the other Philistines stood to this side and to that side, with their eyes shut tight, and saying, "We decline to look at the pages fairly and as a whole, because to look might seem to imply a doubt of what the tumblebug has decreed. Besides, as long as the tumblebug has reasons which he declines to reveal, his reasons stay unanswerable, and you are plainly a prurient rascal who are making trouble for yourself. To the contrary, says Jurgen, I am a poet, and I make literature. But in Philistia, to make literature and to make trouble for yourself are synonyms, the tumblebug explained. I know, for already we of Philistia have been pestered by 3 of these makers of literature. Yes, there was Edgar, whom I starved and haunted until I was tired of it. Then I chased him up a back alley one night and knocked out those annoying brains of his. And there was Walt, whom I chivied and battered from place to place and made a paralytic of him, and him too I labeled offensive and lewd and lascivious and indecent. Then later there was Mark, whom I frightened into disguising himself in a clown's suit, so that nobody might suspect him to be a maker of literature. Indeed, I frightened him so that he hid away the greater part of what he had made until after he was dead, and I could not get at him. That was a disgusting trick to play on me, I consider. Still, these are the only 3 detected makers of literature that have ever infested Philistia. Thanks be to goodness and my vigilance, but for both of which we might have been no more free from makers of literature than are the other countries. Now, but these three, cried Jurgen, are the glory of Philistia. And of all that Philistia has produced, and it's these 3 alone, whom living ye made least of, that today are honored wherever art is honored, and where nobody bothers one way or the other about Philistia. What is art to me in my way of living? Replied the tumblebug wearily. I have no concern with art and letters and the other lewd idols of foreign nations. I have in charge the moral welfare of my young, whom I roll here before me and trust with St. Anthony's aid to raise in time to be God-fearing tumblebugs like me, delighting in what is proper to their nature. For the rest, I have never minded dead men being well spoken of. No, my lad. Once, whatever I may do means nothing to you. And once you are really rotten, you will find the tumblebug friendly enough. Meanwhile, I am paid to protest that living persons are offensive and lewd and lascivious and indecent, and one must live. Then the Philistines who stood to this side and to that side said in indignant unison, and we, the reputable citizenry of Philistia, are not at all in sympathy with those who would take any protest against the tumblebug as a justification of what they are pleased to call art. The harm done by the tumblebug seems to us very slight, whereas the harm done by the self-styled artist may be very great. Jurgen now looked more attentively at this queer creature, and he saw that the tumblebug was malodorous, certainly, but at bottom honest and well-meaning. And this seemed to Jurgen the saddest thing he had found among the Philistines. For the tumblebug was sincere in his insane doings, and all Philistia honored him sincerely, so that there was nowhere any hope for this people. Therefore King Jurgen addressed himself, as his need was, to submit to the strange customs of the Philistines. Now, do you judge me fairly, cried Jurgen to his judges, if there be any justice in this mad country? And if there be none, do you relegate me to limbo or to any other place, so long as in that place this tumblebug is not omnipotent and sincere and insane. And Jurgen waited. These points being settled, the tumblebug went away, smiling benevolently. Morals, not art, he said, as he departed. The judges rose, and they bowed low as the bug passed. The judges conferred together, and Jurgen was decreed a backslider into the ways of undesirable error. His judges were the priests of Valtino and Sesfra and Agius, who are the gods of Philistia. Then the priest of Agius put on his spectacles and consulted the canonical law and declared that this change in the indictment necessitated a severance of Jurgen from the others in the infliction of punishment. For each, of course, must be relegated to the limbo of his fathers, as we foretold, in order that the prophecies may be fulfilled. Religion languishes when the prophecies are not fulfilled. Now it appears that the forefathers of the flesh and blood prisoner were of a different faith from the progenitors of these obsolete illusions, and that his fathers foretold quite different things, and that their limbo was called hell. It is little you know, says Jurgen, of the religion of Eubonia. We have it written down in this great book, the priest of Valtino then told him, every word of it, without blot or error. Then you will see that the king of Eubonia is the head of the church there and changes all the prophecies at will. Learned Guaulus said so directly, and the judicious Stevagonius was forced to agree with him, however unwillingly, and you will instantly discover by consulting the third section of his wildly famous 19th chapter. Quick, more water. Yeah, the 19th chapter. Both Gallus and Stevagonius were probably notorious heretics, says the priest of Agius. I believe that was settled once for all at the Diet of Orthamar. Says Jurgen. He did not like this priest. Now I will wager, sirs, Jurgen continued, a trifle patronizingly, that you gentlemen have not read Gallus, or even Stevagonius, in the light of Vossler's commentaries, and that is why you underrate them. I, at least, have read every word that was ever written by any of these three, replied the priest of Sesfra, and with, as I need hardly say, the liveliest abhorrence. And this Guaulus in particular, as I hasten to agree with my learned confrere, is a most notorious heretic. Oh, sir, said Jurgen, horrified, whatever are you telling me about Guaulus? I tell you that I have been roused to indignation by his Historia de Bello Veneris. You surprise me still. Shocked by his Porno Bosco Didascolio. I can hardly believe it. Even so, you must grant. And horrified by his Liber de Immortalate Montule, while conceding you that earlier works are yet at the same time and have been disgusted by his De Modo Cocundi. But nonetheless, and have shuddered over the unspeakable enormities of his Eratopagion and his Synodica, and especially of his Epibediasis, the most pestilential and abominable book, Quem sin hore nomo potest legere. Still you cannot deny, and have read also all the confutations of this detestable Gallus, as those of Zanchius, Famontinus, Lilius Vincentius, Legala, Thomas Giamenus, and 8 other admirable commentators. You are very exact, sir, but, and that, in short, I have read every book you can imagine, says the priest of Sesfra. The shoulders of Jurgen rose to his ears, and Jurgen silently flung out his hands, palms upward. For I perceive, says Jurgen to himself, that this realist is too circumstantial for me. Nonetheless, he invents his facts. It is by citing books which never existed that he publicly confutes the Gallus whom I invented privately, and that is not fair. Now there remains only one chance for Jurgen, but luckily that chance is sure. Why are you fumbling in your pocket? Asked the old priest of Aegeus, fidgeting and peering. Aha, you may well ask, cried Jurgen. He unfolded the cantrap, which had been given him by the master philologist, and which Jurgen had treasured against the time when more was needed than a glib tongue. Oh, most unrighteous judges, says Jurgen sternly, now hear and tremble. At the death of Adrian V, Pedro Giuliani, who should be named John the 20th, was through an error in the reckoning elevated to the papal chair as John the 21st. Ha! And what have we to do with that? Inquired the priest of Veltino with raised eyebrows. Why are you telling us of these irrelevant matters? Because I thought it would interest you, said Jurgen. It was a fact that appeared to be rather amusing, so I thought I would mention it. Then you have very queer ideas of amusement, they told him, and Jurgen perceived that either he had not employed his cantrap correctly, or else that its magic was unappreciated by the leaders of Philistia. Wow, okay. Gonna have to hydrate up and look forward to reading more soon. And end of March 2021, last days of Periscope as a broadcast platform. But these readings and many others are on YouTube at Roarshock Channel, Roarshcock. So check me out there, and come back getting towards the last part of the book, but there's still a ways to go. Thank you for listening.